The time is at hand.
From the crackhead capital of the world, just on the outskirts of Williamson, West Virginia, you're in Dark Places on Nighthawk Radio. I'm your Huckleberry, Junebug Fugit. I don't know, something just seems off about that. Ozzy Osbourne dies a couple weeks after the Black Sabbath farewell show. Does it show some kind of a satanic ritual or something? I don't know. It's kind of like when Michael Jackson was getting ready to do his farewell show and he just mysteriously died. Some kind of crazy satanic thing that the music industry does. You can get more money out of stuff while it's popular like that. I don't know. It's above my pay grade. We love our synchronicities here on the show. We always talk about weird coincidences. There are no coincidences. Everything happens for a reason. Here's the latest. On Tuesday, July 8th, I had a weird dream. I dream about my mom and dad almost every night. And more often than not, in the dream, they're always sitting down in a chair, just kind of watching the dream unfold. It's weird. Sometimes I kind of interact with them, and they'll joke with me or whatever, but usually they're just watching, keeping an eye on me. So on Tuesday, July 8th, I had a dream that me and my buddy Roger and his daughter were in this old abandoned house, and his daughter laid down on this bed in the house, and the floor fell through with her. And me and Roger were trying to figure out a way to get her out of that hole. And then just all of a sudden, Roger's dad was over on the other side of the room, sitting in a chair. And he was just talking and laughing, joking around with us. And I can't remember what he was saying. So the next day, I told Roger about it. Said, I had the weirdest dream last night. I had a dream about your dad. And he said, no way. Yesterday made the anniversary of his death. So that would have been on the night that I had the dream. I couldn't even remember when his dad died. I usually don't keep track of people's deaths. I always just remember their birthdays. The happy times. But this weird little synchronicity became a double synchronicity. My buddy Steve messaged me on Friday, July 11th about a weird dream he had. And I didn't even tell him about my dream. But he was telling me that his 6th grade teacher died a couple days before that. And she lived on the same street that he did, about 4 doors down. They never really got along, but they were friendly enough to each other. His daughter sent him the obituary because she was in a nursing home for over a year. And he had a dream before his daughter sent the obituary. He dreamed that she was at her house. He could see her out in the yard washing her car. He'd never seen her do that before. He came across the railroad tracks, and when he did, he looked over, and there she was. And she waved at him, and he waved back, and that was all the dream. He thought it was kind of weird because he had the dream, and then found out she died. So I guess maybe a triple synchronicity? Crazy stuff.
This is Mr. Haunted with your In Dark Places breaking news. Out of Key West, Florida, a woman who stopped at an intersection to allow a chicken to cross the road allegedly attacked another driver with bear mace for speeding by her and killing the bird. According to an arrest report obtained by Law and Crime, 38-year-old Cynthia Sosa stopped at an intersection on July 9th to let a chicken cross the road, when another driver began honking at her and later passed her, running over the chicken. Sosa reportedly pursued the driver out of frustration about the chicken's death. Upon catching up to the stopped driver, Sosa allegedly blocked the road in front of the victim's vehicle, got out of her car, and attempted to open the door. They began fighting over the door. Cynthia wanted to teach her a lesson, so she pulled out her bear mace and sprayed it into the vehicle, spraying the victim directly in the face while she was seated inside. Sosa reportedly fled the scene, but was eventually pulled over by police and taken into custody. She was charged with 2 counts of aggravated battery and 1 count of burglary with assault or battery and 1 count of foul play. Get it? Foul play. Thank you. This is Mr. Haunted with In Dark Places News. Back to you, Junebug.
Thank you, Jimmy Haunted. And there's another synchronicity for you. Jimmy did a story about a chicken. And this week on the show, we have weird, winged creatures. These stories are written by Janet and Colin Board. So, thanks to those guys for doing all the heavy lifting for me. These are from my cool encyclopedia-like set of books, Mysteries of Mind, Space and Time. Highly recommended set of books from 1992. The Illini Indians painted a picture of a monstrous bird, the piazza, or a bird that devours men, on a rock face overlooking a river near Alton in Illinois. They used to fire bows or guns at the picture as they passed by in their canoes. The painting was seen by missionary explorers in the 17th century before the rock face was destroyed. In the 1970s, a new piazza design following the traditional one was repainted at Norman's Landing. According to the Illini, the piazza is scaly with a long tail, horns, and red eyes. It can be seen once a year at dawn on the first day of autumn as it emerges from the river to pick a cave for the winter. But despite vigils by students on bluffs above the Mississippi River, no one has seen the dreaded piazza in recent years. However, some Indians claim to see another huge creature, a thunderbird, today. According to James Redsky, an Ojibwa Indian from the Thunder Bay region of Ontario, Canada, we saw a thunderbird a few summers ago. A huge bird it was, a lot bigger than planes you see go by. It didn't flap its wings, not even once. It was white on the underside, black on top. Modern reports of giant birds in the USA began in the late 19th century at Dents Run, Pennsylvania in 1882, when Fred Murray saw a flock of birds that he said looked like giant buzzards with wingspans of more than 16 feet. In February 1895, the disappearance of 10-year-old Landy Jenkins in Webster County, West Virginia, was ascribed to a giant bird. Landy was sent by her mother to a neighbor's house, but never arrived. A search party found her tracks in the snow. They left the path and went a few feet into a field. There, a number of tracks were crowded together, as if she had turned around and around, perhaps trying to avoid something. No trace of Landy was ever found. An incident a few days later suggested what had happened to her. A bear hunter, Peter Swidley, was attacked by a massive bird, which swooped down and dug its talons into his back. Swidley was saved from death by his dog, which made for the bird. The bird turned its attention to the dog, ripping open its stomach with one stroke of its claws before flying off with the unfortunate animal. A deputy sheriff and his son also saw the giant eagle, quote, which captured a fawn while they were in the forest hunting deer. They said that the bird had a wingspan of 15 to 18 feet and a body as large as a man's. The same monster was also thought to be responsible for the strange disappearance of a sheep from a locked shed. One morning, Hans Hardrick found one sheep missing, with a hole in the shed roof, showing how it had been extracted. Some eagle, able to carry away a fawn, and a hunting dog, a sheep, and a 10-year-old girl, and made a bold attempt to carry off a fully grown man. Around 1940 in Pennsylvania, an author and local historian, Robert Lyman, was in the Black Forest near Caldersport when he saw a brownish bird standing in the middle of the road. It stood 3 to 4 feet tall and had a short neck and short legs. When it flew off, Mr. Lyman saw that its narrow wings, when extended, reached across the road, a span of about 20 to 25 feet. He wondered how such a big bird could fly through dense trees so easily. In 1947, farmers around Raymore in Ontario, Canada, were experiencing problems with a giant black bird that was attacking their livestock. It had a hooked beak, huge talons, and yellow eyes the size of silver dollars. A few months later, an outbreak of sightings of big birds occurred in Illinois. "There's a bird outside as big as a B-52, gasped 12-year-old James Terrares as he rushed indoors to his mother. That was in January 1948, and James was the first to report seeing the monster. He lived in Glennsdale, Illinois, and the bird he saw, wings flapping as it flew over, was gray-green in color. A former Army colonel, Walter Sigmund, saw something similar on April 4th. He estimated it to be about 4,000 feet up. From his military experience, he was quite convinced it could only be a bird of some tremendous size. More sightings followed, including some over St. Louis, Missouri. Several witnesses at first believed they were seeing an airplane because of its size, until it began to flap its wings and perform bird-like maneuvers. Policemen and flying instructors were among the witnesses. The last sighting seems to have been on April 30th, 1948. Charles Dunn could hardly believe his eyes when he saw a bird about the size of a Piper club plane, flying at about 3,000 feet and flapping its wings. Little more was seen of the monstrous birds for nearly 2 decades, although in 1957 a huge bird with a wingspan of 25 to 30 feet was seen flying at about 500 feet over Novo, Pennsylvania. In 1966, there were reports from Utah, West Virginia, Ohio, and Kentucky, only some of which could be explained as sightings of rare unknown species. Then, in 1975, during an outbreak of mysterious deaths of animals in Puerto Rico, large birds resembling whitish condors or vultures were seen. On March 26th, Juan Muñez Feliciano, a workman, was attacked by a terrible grayish creature with lots of feathers, a long thick neck, bigger than a goose. At the end of July 1977, a big bird was seen trying to steal a young pig weighing about 50 to 60 pounds near Delava, Illinois. The bird had a companion. Both resembled California condors and had 8-foot wingspans, but an ecologist at the University of Illinois commented that condors are rare, almost to the point of extinction, could not lift such a weight, and, anyway, feed on dead animals, not live ones. What was it then that tried to abduct 10-year-old Marlon Lowe from the garden of his home in Lawndale, Illinois, on July 5th? That bird, too, was accompanied by another. The near tragedy took place only a few days before the abortive pig stealing, and 10 miles away. Marlon was playing hide-and-seek when, at 8:10 p.m., one of the birds snatched him off the ground. Fortunately, his mother was at hand. She saw Marlon's feet dangling in the air and screamed, and the bird dropped the boy before he had been lifted very high. Mrs. Lowe was only about 10 feet away from the bird, and afterward recalled, "I'll always remember how that huge thing was bending its white ringed neck and seemed to be trying to peck at Marlon as it was flying away." She described the birds as very black, except for the white rings around their necks, which were about 18 inches long. They had hooked bills, 6 inches long, and a wingspan of at least 8 feet. She estimated they would have stood about 4.5 feet tall had they landed. 6 people watched the birds fly off toward Kickapoo Creek, where there is a heavy underbrush and thick tree cover. But for the birds being startled by Mrs. Lowe's screams, Marlon would probably have suffered the same fate as Marie Delex, Jimmy Keeney, and Landy Junkins. As it was, the Lows suffered in other ways. They were harassed by people leaving dead birds on their front porch, and by unpleasant notes and telephone calls. At school, Marlon, nicknamed Bird Boy, had literally to fight off the taunts of his fellows. His red hair turned gray, and for a year, the frightened boy refused to go out after night had fallen. An amazing report in a learned journal, The Zoologist, for July 1868 describes what the writer had seen earlier the same year at Copiapco in Chile. Yesterday at about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, when the daily labors in this mine were over, and all the workmen were together awaiting their supper, we saw coming through the air a gigantic bird, which at first we took for one of the clouds, then partially darkening the atmosphere. Supposing it to have been separated from the rest by the wind, its course was from northwest to southeast, its flight rapid and in a straight line. As it was passing a short distance above our heads, we could mark the strange formation of its body. Its immense wings were clothed with a grayish plumage. Its monstrous head was like that of a locust. Its eyes were wide open and shone like burning coals. It seemed to be covered with something resembling the thick and stout bristles of a boar, while on its body, elongated like that of a serpent, we could only see brilliant scales, which clashed together with a metallic sound as the strange animal turned its body in its flight. In some ways this report resembles those of the airplane-sized birds seen over Illinois in the USA in 1948. But the Chilean workmen were closer to their bird when they saw it and were able afterward to describe its rather strange appearance. Was it really a bird, or could it have been a flying reptile? Perhaps this was nothing more than a journalistic hoax, as the Thunderbird, reportedly killed near Tombstone, Arizona in 1890, is strongly suspected to be. The details came from an article in the Tombstone Epitaph for April 26, 1890. What supposedly happened is briefly told. Two ranchers riding in the desert chased a winged monster resembling a huge alligator with an extremely elongated tail and an immense pair of wings, which was apparently exhausted. They got near enough to kill it with gunfire, and then set about measuring it. It was about 92 feet long, with a wingspan of some 160 feet. The wings and body were without hair or feathers, and the jaw was filled with sharp teeth. The whole Tombstone saga is complicated by the fact that a Thunderbird was supposed to have been killed in the same area in 1886. There are researchers who claim to have seen a photograph of it, but so far no one has been able to locate the elusive picture. No one seems to know what happened to the corpse of the Thunderbird, if it even existed. Several good stories published in American newspapers during the second half of the 19th century have since been found to be tall tales, and this may be another. If the Copiapco and Tombstone birds really existed, they sound more like prehistoric monsters than birds we are familiar with today. Some years earlier, in the 1850s, a French newspaper reported that a living pterodactyl had been discovered by some men blasting rock at Colmont in Outre-Marne, France. The creature emerged from a cavity in the rock, and it looked like a bat the size of a large goose. It was black in color, and its wingspan was about 10 feet. Unfortunately, present-day researchers have been unable to find any supporting evidence for this story. 19th century pterodactyl reports were admittedly unreliable, but the 20th century produced some puzzling American accounts that are less easily dismissed. The earliest 20th century reports concern an enigmatic monster, the so-called Jersey Devil. In January 1909, this weird thing terrorized the state of New Jersey. This lair was supposed to be somewhere in the Pine Barrens, an isolated area in the southeast of the state. All manner of strange phenomena were attributed to the Jersey Devil over the years, but the events we are describing concerns sightings of a strange winged monster and the footprints it left behind. The events began in January 1909, when the Jersey Devil was reported in at least 30 towns. One of the earliest sightings was on January 17th at Bristol, Pennsylvania, close to the New Jersey border. At 2 a.m., John McOwen heard strange noises and got out of bed. He said, "I looked from the window and was astonished to see a large creature standing on the banks of the canal. It looked something like an eagle, and it hopped along the towpath." Patrolman James Sackville also saw it in Bristol that night. He reported that it was winged and hopped like a bird, but it had strange features and a horrible scream. Sackville ran toward it and fired his revolver as it flew off. A third Bristol sighting, early that same morning, was made by Postmaster E.W. Minister, who saw the Jersey Devil flying over the Delaware River. The large crane-like bird seemed to be glowing, and it got close enough for Minister to see many details. Its head resembled that of a ram, with curled horns, and its long thick neck was thrust forward in flight. It had long thin wings and short legs, the front legs shorter than the hind. Again it uttered its mournful and awful cry, a combination of a squawk and a whistle. Bristol residents next morning found the Jersey Devil's footprints in the snow. They resembled hoof prints. During the following week, the Jersey Devil seemed to be everywhere.
He's everywhere! He's everywhere!
And its presence caused panic in the state. Farmers set steel traps and hunters followed the hoof prints. The scene must have looked like the present-day flaps that occur when sightings of a Bigfoot are published in any area, leading to an influx of photographers and hunters with resulting chaos. But the Jersey Devil seemed indifferent to the furor. On Tuesday, January 19th, in the early hours, Mr. and Mrs. Nelson Evans of Gloucester City, New Jersey, were treated to a close-up view of the monster dancing on their shed roof for 10 minutes, said Mr. Evans later. It was about 3.5 feet high, with a head like a collie dog and a face like a horse. It had a long neck, wings about 2 feet long, and its back legs were like those of a crane, and it had horse's hoofs. It walked on its back legs and held up 2 short front legs with paws on them. It didn't use the front legs at all while we were watching. My wife and I were scared, I tell you, but I managed to open the window and say, "Shoo," and it turned around, barked at me, and flew away. Other witnesses mentioned that it had skin like an alligator's, and some thought it was nearer 6 feet high. The last sightings seem to have been on Friday, January 22nd, after which the Jersey Devil disappeared as suddenly as it had arrived.
This is Mr. Haunted with some In Dark Places breaking news. Out of Vernon, California, a 19-year-old sanitation worker was killed to death at Tina's Burritos Factory in Vernon on Sunday night. The teenager, whose name has not been released, was cleaning a meat grinder during an after-hours sanitation shift when the machine unexpectedly activated, said Sergeant Daniel Anopa. If that was my last name, I would have used that all my life. For example, in school as a kid. "Hey, Daniel, you want to play kickball with us right now?" Nopa. Of the Vernon Police Department. The incident occurred around 9:30 p.m. when the young worker was sucked into the industrial food processor. Despite hearing his cries for help, coworkers were unable to stop the machine to sit in time to save him. Emergency responders arrived shortly after, but found the teenager had already died. The California Division of Occupational Safety and Health, along with the District Attorney's Office, has launched an investigation into the tragic incident. Authorities do not suspect foul play, said Sergeant Anopa. describing the event as a terrible accident. The investigation aims to determine how the machine was activated and led to his death. Back to Junebug with more In Dark Places. This is Mr. Haunted with your breaking news.
Mr. Haunted, thank you, sir. Makes me wonder, would anyone rescue me if I ever fell in the meat grinder at work? As we come nearer to present day, witnesses of giant birds begin to identify them as pterodactyls, a trend that may reflect increased public knowledge about prehistoric creatures. In May of 1961, a businessman flying a small plane over the Hudson River Valley was buzzed by a huge bird, which scarcely seemed to move its wings. He reported that it was a big bird, bigger than an eagle. It looked more like a pterodactyl out of the prehistoric ages. In the early 60s, a couple driving at night through Trinity Forest in California saw what they first thought was a plane in trouble, but then decided it must be a bird. It was flying at treetop height and seemed to have a wingspan of about 14 feet. The couple could not discern any detail since the bird was only a silhouette to them as it flew across the road ahead and then up a gulch toward a mine. They decided that it had looked something like a pterodactyl. Later they learned that friends of theirs had made a similar sighting in the same area and that they too had identified the bird as a pterodactyl. Early in 1976, strange reports began to emerge from Texas of sightings of creatures resembling weird birds or prehistoric flying reptiles. As usual, there were numerous logical explanations for what the witnesses claimed to have seen, but the explanations rarely fitted the facts. The first sighting was made on January 1st at Harlingen by Jackie Davis and Tracy Lawson. They saw a bird about 5 feet tall with shoulders 3 feet wide. It was black in color with big dark red eyes, a bald head, and a face like a gorilla's with a sharp beak 6 inches long. The next day their parents investigated and found 5 tracks which had 3 toes and were 8 inches across and 1.5 inches deep. A man weighing 170 pounds was unable to make an equally deep impression in the hard ground. A week later, on January 7th, Alvarico Guajardo saw what might have been the same bird. He had gone outside to investigate after something had hit his trailer home in Brownsville, switched on the headlights of his station wagon, and they illuminated something from another planet. The creature, 4 feet tall, stared at the terrified man with blazing red eyes. Guajardo saw black feathers, a beak 2 to 4 feet long, and bat-like wings. It made a terrible noise as it backed away from the lights. Guajardo finally escaped into a neighbor's house. The newspaper reporter who interviewed Guajardo the next day said he was still terrified. Among other sightings in that state, Armando Grimaldo's experience was the most frightening. He was actually attacked by the bird during the evening of January 14th as he sat in his mother-in-law's backyard at Raymondville. As he looked around to investigate a noise like a flapping of bat-like wings and a funny kind of whistling, he was grabbed from above by something big with claws. He fled, and looking back he saw a bird as big as a man with a wingspan of between 10 to 12 feet. It had a face like a bat or a monkey, big red eyes, no beak, and dark leathery skin without feathers. A big black bird with bat-like face, seen near Brownsville by Libby and Deanie Ford, was identified by them as a pterodactyl. On February 24th, 3 elementary school teachers driving near San Antonio also saw what they believed to be a pterodactyl. As it swooped low over their cars, its shadow covered the road. They estimated its wingspan between 15 and 20 feet. Mrs. Patricia Bryant said it was as big as a Piper Club plane, and that she could see the skeleton of this bird through the skin or feathers or whatever, and it stood out black against the background of gray feathers. David Rendon commented that the bird glided rather than flew, that it had huge bony wings like a bat's. The most prosaic explanation for all these reports is that the witnesses were simply overawed by sightings of rare native birds. But does the pterodactyl indication deserve to be taken seriously? These flying reptiles are supposedly to have been extinct for 64 million years. Pterodactyls once lived in Texas, where their fossils have been found there. Is it possible that any could have survived? Or, most fantastic suggestion of all, was the structure of time disrupted? Could animals living in a past era suddenly have materialized into present day? On September 18th, 1877, a winged humanoid being was seen over Brooklyn, New York. Few details are available, but a similar figure was seen in September 1880, not far away at Coney Island. It was described in the New York Times, none too seriously, as a man with bat's wings and improved frog's legs. Sightings of winged humanoids were widely distributed around the globe than those of giant birds and supposed pterodactyls. The next report comes from Vladivostok in the far eastern Russia. On July 11th, 1908, a man walking in the Sikhote-Alin Mountains saw what looked like a man's footprints on a path ahead. This dog began to act strangely, and something could be heard trampling among the bushes. After several minutes of standing and listening, the walker, V.K. Arsenyev, threw a stone toward the unseen creature, whereupon he heard the sound of wings beating and saw something large and black fly away over the river. Unfortunately, he could make out no details because of the fog. Later, when that guy told local people what had happened, they identified the creature as a man who could fly in the air, well known to hunters in the area. A Brazilian couple, the Reals, had a closer view of their winged people. Early in the 1950s, they were walking one night in the woods near the sea at Pelotas in the state of Rio Grande do Sul, when they noticed two gigantic birds in the trees. As they got nearer, the birds came down to the ground, and the amazed pair saw that the creatures were about 6 feet tall and looked human. They were crouching on the ground as if observing the Reals. Luis do Rosario Real wished to approach them more closely, but his wife insisted that they return home. A strange report describing an even closer sighting comes from Houston, Texas. The night of June 18, 1953 was hot. 3 neighbors were sitting out in the front porch of an apartment house in the small hours. Mrs. Hilda Walker later said, "We were just talking idly. When we looked up, at about 25 feet away, I saw a huge shadow across the lawn. I thought at first it was the magnified reflection of a big moth caught in a nearby streetlight, and then the shadow seemed to bounce upward into a pecan tree. I could see him plain, and could see he had big wings folded at his shoulders. There was a dim gray light all around him. The shadow was also seen by Howard Phillips and Judy Myers, and they described it as the figure of a man with wings like a bat. He was dressed in gray or black, tight-fitting clothes. He stood there for about 30 seconds, swaying on the branch of the old pecan tree. Suddenly the light began to fade away slowly. They agreed also that he was about 6.5 feet tall and wore a black cape, tight trousers, and quarter-length boots. As the light faded, the figure seemed to melt away, and the 3 heard a loud swooping noise over the houses and saw a white flash. All were adamant that they had seen this inexplicable apparition. Not quite so clearly visible, but still definitely man-shaped, was the figure standing in the middle of the road ahead of a woman driving her father along Route 2 in the Chief Cornstalk hunting grounds of West Virginia in 1960 or 1961. As they got closer, the driver slowed the car. The 2 apprehensive witnesses saw that the gray figure was much larger than a man. The driver later reported what happened next. A pair of wings unfolded from his back, and they practically filled the whole road. It almost looked like an airplane. Then it took off straight up, disappearing out of sight in seconds. We were both terrified. I stepped on the gas and raced out of there. We talked it over and decided not to tell anybody about it. Who would believe us anyway? Who indeed? Although she did not know it, she was possibly the first witness of a winged being later named Mothman, which in late 1966 plagued an area of West Virginia called Point Pleasant. First to see it at that time were two young local couples, Mr. and Mrs. Roger Scarberry and Mr. and Mrs. Steve Mallett. Late on the night of November 15th, they were driving through the TNT area where there was an abandoned wartime explosive factory. As they passed an old generator plant, they saw in the darkness two bright red circles, which looked like eyes. As the circles moved, the couple saw a man-shaped figure between 6 and 7 feet tall, grayish in color and with big folded wings. It was shuffling along on two legs. Roger, who was driving, quickly turned the car in the direction of safety, and they drove off at speed. But they saw the creature, or another similar one, standing near the road, and as they went past it spread its bat-like wings and began to follow them. Even though they accelerated to 100 miles an hour, the bird kept pace with them, without flapping its wings. Mrs. Mallett could hear it squeaking like a big mouse. When they reported their experience at the sheriff's office, the deputy could see that they were scared, and he drove straight to the TNT area, but saw nothing strange. The story was publicized, and Point Pleasant immediately became a focus of attention for monster hunters. Armed men searched the TNT area, but did not find their prey. However, Mothman was still around. On the evening of November 16th, he appeared to Mrs. Marcella Bennett, who was visiting friends living in the TNT area. She was sitting in the parked car when she noticed a figure in the darkness. It seemed as if it had been lying down. It rose up slowly from the ground, a big gray thing, bigger than a man, with terrible glowing red eyes. Like the two couples on the previous night, Mrs. Bennett seemed hypnotized by Mothman's red eyes. As she stood there, staring at it, she and her baby daughter were grabbed by a friend and dragged into the house. During the following days, numerous people saw Mothman, or believed they did. How many of the sightings were caused by the contagion of news stories, we shall never know. The writer John Keel went to the Point Pleasant area to investigate at hand. From the many reports he collected, he established that Mothman was between 5 and 7 feet tall, gray or brown in color, and man-shaped, but without arms or head. It had luminous bright red eyes where a man's shoulders would be. The wings were folded back when not in use, and the wing spread was about 10 feet. The majority of sightings were made in November and December 1966, and then Mothman was gone. 3 Marines on guard duty near Da Nang in South Vietnam in July or August 1969 got a closer view of the extraordinary entity that flew over them in the early hours of the morning. The story was later told by one of them, Earl Morrison. All of a sudden, I don't know why, we all looked out there to the sky, and we saw this figure coming toward us. It had a kind of glow, and we couldn't make out what it was at first. It started coming toward us, real slowly. All of a sudden, we saw what looked like wings, like a bat's, only it was gigantic compared with what a regular bat would be. After it got close enough, we could see what it was. It looked like a woman, a naked woman. She was black, her skin was black, her body was black. The wings were black, everything was black, but it glowed. It glowed in the night, kind of a greenish cast to it. The 3 saw her long enough to notice that she had arms, hands and fingers, but those were joined to her wings. They just stood there and watched as she flew overhead, a couple yards above them. Sometimes, as in this report, the sightings have been single ones, the mysterious winged entity afterward disappearing as if it never existed, and sometimes, as in West Virginia, in 1966, there have been repeated sightings in small areas, but still without real clues emerging as to the nature of the apparition. Perhaps the strangest series of reports of winged things are those concerning the Owl Man seen in Cornwall, England in 1976 and 1978. The Owl Man's territory was very small, the area around Malnan Church on the south coast. He was first seen on April 17, 1976, hovering over the church tower by June Melling and her sister Vicky. June described and drew a feathered Birdman. Nearly 3 months passed before the second sighting, made on July 3rd. Again, the witnesses were young girls, 14-year-old Sally Chapman and Barbara Perry. They were camping in the woods at about 10 p.m. when they realized they were not alone. They heard a strange hissing noise, and then they saw a figure standing not far away among the pine trees. Sally described what she saw. It was like a big owl with pointed ears, as big as a man. The eyes were red and glowing. At first I thought it was someone dressed up, playing a joke, trying to scare us. I laughed at it, we both did. And then it just went up in the air and we both screamed. When it went up, you could see its feet were like pincers. Barbara added, "It's true, it was horrible. A nasty owl face and big ears and big red eyes. It was covered in gray feathers. The claws on its feet were black. It just flew straight up and disappeared in the treetops." Next day, July 4th, yet another young girl, Jan Greenwood, along with her sister, saw the Owlman. Jan described what they saw in a letter to a local newspaper. It was Sunday morning, and the place was in the trees, Monin Church, above the rocky beach. It was in the trees, standing like a full-grown man, but the legs were bent backward, like a bird's. It saw us and quickly jumped up and rose straight up through the trees. My sister and I saw it very clearly before it rose up. It has red slanting eyes and a very large mouth. The feathers were silvery gray, and so were its body and legs. The feet were like big black crab's claws. We were frightened at the time. It was so strange, like something in a horror film. After the thing went up, there was a crackling sound in the treetops for ages. Later that day, we spoke to some people at the campsite who said they had seen the Morgar monster on Saturday when they were swimming with face masks and snorkels in the river below where we saw the Birdman. They saw it underwater, and they said it was enormous and shaped like a lizard. Our mother thinks we made it all up just because we read about these things, but that is not true. We really saw the Birdman, though it could have been something playing a trick in a very good costume and makeup. But how could it rise up like that? If we imagined it, then we both imagined the same thing at the same time. The Morgar monster she refers to is a sea monster that was also putting in regular appearances in Falmouth Bay during 1976. UFOs were seen in the area too. Falmouth Bay was the best place to be in 1976 if you longed for a strange experience. After July 1976, the Owlman apparently did not reappear until June 1978. Early that month, a 16-year-old girl saw a monster, like a devil, flying up through the trees near Old Monin Church. On August 2nd, 3 young French girls also saw him near the church. They were frightened by something very big, like a big furry bird. It was white, with a gaping mouth and big round eyes. Hey, would you look at the time? I think we're about out of stories for you this week. We really appreciate you listening. Thanks as always, Jimmy Haunted. Thanks to all the crew at Nighthawk Radio. If you've got a true scary story and you'd like to be a guest on the show, or if you got a story for us, send an email to indarkplacespod@hotmail.com. We'll see you again right here next week. Same bad time. God bless.